everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Incorruptible Mass. Our mission is to help you transform state politics. We know that together we can make Massachusetts policy reflect the needs of the vast majority of the residents of our beautiful state. And today we are so excited to have Manny Alvarado, who is from Manny Jae Media, and talk about his own, media broadcast that he does through his community. But before we do, I am going to go ahead and have Jonathan introduce himself.
Jonathan Cohn from his joining from Boston. Have been active in issuing the kind of electoral politics in Massachusetts for coming close to a decade now, which is a lot to say.
I am Anna Callahan coming at you from Medford, she/her, and also love state and local politics. And now we would love to dive in. Manny, if you would start off, just talk a little bit, first of all, about your show, where people can find it, what it is, just a sort of elevator pitch about your show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And please forgive my cat. I'm trying to push him off, but he doesn't want to go. He wants to hang out with me. So he's here to stay for the show.
We have two guys.
That's going to go ahead and that's going to be another 10 subscribers for us, that cat right there.
Cuteness level, right? Look at him. He was actually just born in November, so he's still a baby. But yeah, so I do a show. Well, first of all, I have a media company that I'm just starting to get off the ground now. We just started in February running, and we're filing for our LLC this week. So we got a lot of exciting things in the works. Manny Jae Media is the name. Manny is my name. The J is my middle initial, but also represents my 3 kids. So it is a legacy company or a framework for Jaden, Akeem, and Ethan. Those are the 3 initials for Manny Jae. And I just love the name. I think it's so it keeps me focused, right? It keeps me on track to why I do what I do. And that's for our future, for my babies, for all of our babies. And making a better world for them to live in. Because to be honest, one of the things that I've often regretted was never my kids, but the fact that I feel so much responsibility for bringing them into such what can sometimes be a pretty crummy world. And there's nothing I can do to protect them from everything, right? So there's going to be some things that I can protect them from, or, I could tell them not to put their finger in a light socket, for example. That's protecting them from one of the dangers of the world. But I can't protect them. Say, for example, my son, when he was in first grade, he got punched in the face on the bus, and there was nothing I could do about it. I wasn't even allowed to see the video of my son getting punched in the face to see what led up to that. Was he acting out? Is there something that I need to do to make sure that he isn't putting himself in a position? No, I was for the privacy right of the other kid, which I kind of get, but at the same time, I also get that, my son was hurt. So there's things like that you don't have control over everything. So since I can't control everything, I want to try to impact something. And I would love to help impact my community again to make a brighter future for the children. As cliche as that might sound, I mean it.
Hey man, that's what it is. It's real, right?
Yeah, it is.
Awesome. I want to hear a little bit more about so why did you, and you do basically a podcast or like a you do YouTube videos, and it's once a week, and where can people find you?
So Manny Jae Media is where you can find me on all platforms. That's at MANNYJAEMEDIA on all platforms. Right now we're on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and I know I'm missing one. I'll come back to that. I don't want to waste too much time stalling. And so what we do is I have 2 shows. One is Manny on the Streets. So that's me. Those are live. I go out into the street whenever I know something's happening, whether it's a community event or, for example, I just went for this entrepreneur who does catering services at the Worcester Food Hub. And I did live interviews with her and some of the other small businesses that are getting their startup at the Worcester Food Hub to try to drive some traffic down to them. So that they're making money while they're there and experience a little bit of success so they can keep on this path and then hopefully find themselves in a brick and mortar with the support of our community. So there's little things I do like that. Also, just bringing the awareness to the community events, to A lot of the things that are going on that the traditional media does not show up to. How do I know? Because I'm there with my camera and I'm the only one with the camera. But it's cool because that gives me um, that unique access or that unique look into the community that nobody else has. And
Great.
I
And
think that's what gives me a platform to begin with. That's what piques people's interest.
yeah, I'd love to. I know we were talking a little bit beforehand, and I'd love to hear you dive into like why did you start this and who is the community that you're able to reach?
Absolutely. So I'm of Puerto Rican and Cuban descent. So my dad's Puerto Rican, my mom's actually half Cuban and half white. So I've gotten a pretty good perspective of both sides of this picture and why I am where I am and why I feel what I do is so important. And that is, I grew up in the projects here in Worcester, Great Brook Valley, one of the hardest hit ghettos, if you would, or hood areas here in Worcester. Back in the 90s, there was a big crack epidemic. And actually, I was born in 84, and right before that, there was actually a police station in the valley or a police department in Great Brook Valley that was really meant to oversee the residents of Great Brook Valley, who just happened to be the majority of Black and Puerto Rican descent, with only about 3 families in the whole development of what was it, like 3,000? Of 3,000 families. There was like
Wow.
3 white families. So and they were very, very poor white families, and to be honest, treated just the same as everybody else. So it as far as the police department went and the brutality that was inflicted on the community, which was the reason for the riots, which was the reason where it was a satellite department, like a substation,
Mm.
was completely removed from there. So I grew up though witnessing a lot of civil unrest, a lot of rioting, a lot of um, drug use, and just different kinds of abuses within that very poor community, full of people who were literally just trying to survive. And every community has bad people. That's something I think we can all agree on.
Yeah.
My goal has always been to show the good. And one of my greatest inspirations for doing that has been my mom. And that's because, when I was a kid in this terrible projects, which to me, honestly, growing up, I thought it was amazing. I even told myself I want to raise my kids here, but that was my young kid brain. Um, I saw my mom advocating for the residents. She volunteered for the Worcester Housing Authority and making sure that people had access to things like food stamps and, making sure that their rent would be covered if they couldn't cover it because, life happens.
Yeah.
She also volunteered for the Mass Union Public Housing Tenants, where she actually went during the Clinton administration and met with Al Gore and actually set national precedents of how housing authorities should be run and residents should be treated.
Right on.
And I saw all that, yeah. And I was inspired to help in other ways. And she's here watching. So she did say they actually saved public housing because there was a big push to end public housing in the 90s.
Yeah.
Which is actually
The 90s were a bad decade for a lot of things. They
for a
were
lot
terrible.
of things, specifically for human rights, for women rights, right? For gay rights,
Yeah.
and for
Incarceration was terrible.
For incarceration
Oof.
and also for low income people.
Mhm.
So I saw all this and I lived it, and I wanted to give back in my own way, in my own right. And one thing that I really noticed was every time I put on the news or watch TV or even watched a movie, Black and brown people were not represented in the best light. They were always represented as gangbangers, drug dealers, pimps, hoes, prostitutes, abusers, people who stole things, who were the downfall of communities, right? But I lived in that community and I knew it wasn't true.
Yeah.
I was like, every time I go outside, it doesn't look like the movies or the news are showing me. So how is this happening? And, as I grew up, I learned systemic oppression. It's just woven into our very problematic quilt that is American history. And I needed to just do my best to be that voice and provide that amplification for the other amazing, beautiful voices in my community to show exactly what these disparaged communities that are being their truths are being majorly exaggerated on. You know, there's a lot of beauty that goes on in these communities every single day that nobody ever hears about, and I wanted to be the person to bring that to light.
Right on.
I think it's like such a core thing, because you do have a dynamic with a lot of, when you think of, let's say, the tradition and what still exists of local media, but like particularly let's like the local TV stations or what come to mind, is that often the only times that they really go into kind of lower income neighborhoods of a city is to report on like a shooting just happened, and that's the only time that they ever go. They don't typically cover either, let's say, the needs that exist when you come to, if you're talking about like what people who live there actually need better out of city or state government, or what, like what's not being met, what resources aren't there that to be, as or even just, let's say, like thriving culture or kind of that exists in many places, like the exciting community events that can often exist as well. So it does like a disservice, both to, like multiple levels of disservice, by portraying neighborhoods just by the place where all of the shootings happen, that do nothing to reduce the number of shootings that happen, and do nothing to meet real needs or to connect people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, thank you for bringing up that point. And that, you know, one of the major things I remember growing up in Great Brook Valley as a young child was going to school, and I guess, for a lack of a better term, being bullied because of the stories that these kids who have never been to my neighborhood heard, or because of the gunshots, whether they heard them for real or not, I don't know, because I will tell you, gunshots did happen. Shootings didn't necessarily happen, but like anywhere, you can go out to a ranch, you know, out in the countryside and hear gunshots, because hunters, right?
Yeah.
You know, not necessarily killing people or hurting people or committing crimes. And so crimes weren't being made every day in my community, although I was being talked to as if they were. And how can I survive there? And how did I not get shot? And they're always with this surprise that I made it another day. And that was quite hurtful to me, because I knew I loved my family. I knew I loved my uncles. I knew I loved my cousins. I knew I loved my adult male neighbors, who were all being villainized. And, you know, people that I knew were saying they were scared of these people that I knew they had no reason to be scared of. And why was that? A lot of the reason was because of things that they heard in the media, and then connected those two dots in their head, what they heard in the media versus what their actual real life experience was, maybe just hearing a gunshot and coming up with an assumption of what happened. So imagine the parents of these kids who didn't know me, didn't know my family. At least these kids knew me enough to know that I'm a good person and they cared about me, you know, to say, oh, I heard a gunshot and I'm happy you weren't hurt. Now, these parents who don't know me, don't know my family, are the ones who are actually having the impact when they vote on a lot of the things that have an impact on our direct lives, safety, and security as residents here in this city. Particularly from my experience, laws that have to do with policing. There's been a lot of money given, and I think too much money and power given to police stations to police communities of color specifically, and then very poor communities differently than they do affluent communities, or quote unquote affluent communities. So, you know, I wanted to really break down those stereotypes and show people the actual truth through my lens of truth, which was simply my cell phone camera. And what I would do was I would make friends everywhere I go, because I'm a great talker, great communicator. And I don't know, I just happen to I'm friendly with everyone, and people like me. And they're like, you know, one of the things, excuse me, that was brought to me in my adult life, actually only 4 years ago when I was 30. Well, I was 34 at the time. No, 35, excuse me. I'll be turning 39. Um, I had worked at a community radio station for, I don't know if I could say the name. I probably shouldn't. I don't think it's going to matter very much sooner anyway. But I was working for someone who at the time was on the city council, but was
Mm.
also a former mayor of Worcester. I was actually volunteering to produce her radio talk show for free. I mean, that's what volunteering is. I don't know why I said that, but
Sure, sure.
this is all to say she's talking about Latinos and the bad effect that they have on the community and the gangs
Oh
and
my
this,
God.
that, and the third, and how they're, oh, they're the bad ones, blah, blah, blah.
Ugh.
And as soon as we go off air, she's like, hey, are the mics muted? Because that was one of the other things. They all had to make sure that there was no hot mics going. So that was one of my main jobs, make sure that the mics were off. So that way during commercials, they could say how they really felt without being caught.
Ugh.
She looks at me and says, oh, but not you, sweetie. You're one of the good ones.
Oh, that's so bad.
Especially when you look at me, and usually I have my beard trimmed, so I'm a little bit more clean, but I'm very, very, very white passing. Okay. And that matters. I have a privilege that a lot of people don't have. That my own family members, my dad's mother is an Afro Latina.
Mm.
Okay, so people look at her like she's black more than they do. They don't see white in her at all. You know, and I've been able to be in the room and see that the power of that privilege and play, and that people feel like they can say certain things around me and it's okay because we have apparently our skin color in common. I'm not really sure why they think it's okay. And I
Great
don't have an
question.
accent.
Oh,
You know what I mean? Yeah. So, and this is a local politician, and this was just a couple years ago, and
amazing.
that's when it dawned on me. My whole life has been a lie. Like I'm thinking I'm living in the great north
Mm.
where the racism doesn't exist. Little was I expect to learn that racism is not as rampant as I'm sorry, my mouth, my brain and my mouth aren't cooperating, but racism is just as rampant, if not more, here in the great north. Because in my opinion, at least down south where it's out in the open and you know who to look out for, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I've
Here,
heard people
it's
say that about
positive.
Boston before. I've had Black
Yeah,
friends say that about Boston, that like here it's so like quiet and
positive.
unstated that it's really much harder to navigate around.
Yeah.
Um,
And you
and
don't know. I feel like I'd rather you be honest with me and give me the opportunity or the respect, I guess. Well, I mean, I guess respect and racism do not go hand
don't
in
go
hand, but
together.
right. But you know what I'm saying? At least to know, like, I should keep
Mhm.
myself away from you
Yeah.
than for you to smile in my face and give me this false sense of security. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So that's one of the crazy things about here. And so I took that experience and I said, you know what I want to do? I want to prove to people like her that my people, the blanket statement that she's throwing out there is
Yeah.
false.
Oh
And if
yeah.
she looks at me and a lot of the people around me and sees all the wonderful things they've done, all the wonderful businesses that have come out of the Latino community, all the wonderful nonprofit organizations that have come out of the Latino community, all of the public free events that have come out of the Latino community, and the same for the Black community, and the same for the LGBTQ community. That these aren't communities that you need to be scared for your life, literally.
Yeah. I know. I
I
mean,
wanted to
there's
show that.
boy, you've given us so much here already. Like there's so many things. I just want to put in one tiny comment about how structurally our media is so incentivized to portray police and military in a positive light. There's actually like millions and millions of dollars of military
Right.
funding where they can like, and we pay this money, right? This is our money through the
Yeah.
US military that is available for free, like training and consultation and equipment and all sorts of stuff for Hollywood but they get to sort of veto lines in the script. So the military gets to decide, make decisions about the script and whether the script is appropriate, right? Whether it's pro-military enough and pro-cop enough. What is it?
Imagine you telling your boss how things are going to work.
Yeah, right. So we know how that works, but that whole culture of the media, like portraying the police and the military as these wonderful, perfect people who never make a mistake and whose entire reason for being is good, right? You know, this whole portrayal of them comes from the very top, like comes from the national military and the highest, hundreds of millions of dollars budget movies and TV shows. And that culture continues to go down through state and local media entities that end up doing the same thing that you're talking about.
Right. And military and police, I might add, that aren't necessarily really needed, or at least on the scale that we have them. Do we need Homeland Security? Absolutely. Makes perfect sense, right? You want to make sure that we're not invaded and, captured and all the craziness that happens when one empire falls and another one rises. I get that part. Do we need to be going into other countries and telling people how they can use their natural resources? Absolutely not. We need to mind our business in a lot of things. Do we need to be criticizing other people and countries and how they run? Absolutely not. Because look at us. We're supposedly the greatest, richest first world country, right? Or do I have that wrong?
They're supposed to be.
Okay. Yet we do a lot of disgusting things. I don't mean to go too far left here, but how come
it's hard to get too far left for
state.
us.
I don't remember if it was Iowa or Idaho. I know it was an I state where you had two men in a room, one arguing about gun laws and why do we feel the need to keep guns over the lives of our children, and another one arguing over how it's more important that we focus on sustaining a law that allows parents to let their 12-year-old minor marry a grown adult. It's crazy. Now we know why children can't marry adults, right? I mean, I at least I would assume that the jury is in, and the science proves that most brains are not fully developed until 24 years old. So a 12-year-old is certainly not able to make a decision on whether or not they want to spend the rest of their life with a greasy old man. A dirty, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I feel like our priorities are so backwards, it's not even funny. The fact that we're willing to militarize our schools instead of just simply getting stricter gun control laws, because it's really not, we're not saying take away your guns that you really don't need. And then the funniest one is, oh, but wait till the government comes for your guns. Bro, when the government comes for your guns, you only got two arms, which means you can only hold two AK-47s at once. You're not going against the entire military with two AK-47s. So that argument right there is stupid at best, right?
I was just reading this article about Brazil, because apparently there've been, in the last like 6 or 10 years, there've been a rush of school shootings in Brazil, and not just shootings, but like a lot of them are not shootings, they're stabbings, but violence in the schools. And the Brazilian government, national, state, local, they are like going crazy passing laws, right? They're passing gun laws, they're passing other laws, they're getting, doing all the things that America is doing, but they're also doing a whole ton of things that America is not doing,
Right.
And it was a really interesting discussion about how, this has been going on for 30, 40 years in America. And we're totally stuck, unable to pass anything. Like, we can't pass anything. And in Brazil,
and you know what?
they've had 6 years of this, and
ago,
suddenly they're passing all sorts of stuff. They're taking action. So
right. And 30 and 40 years ago, there were drugs. Yeah, there were. There were things like LSD, right? Acid, weed. There were knives. So there were drugs, there were violence, there were kids that lost their lives. but there weren't literally 12 in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Losing 12 kids in one school.
Every
That's a
week.
major difference. You know, we're always going to have violence no matter where we look, no matter where we go. But I'm sure a whole classroom has a better chance of outrunning a psycho with a knife than they do a psycho with a gun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and this even reminds me of something that my dad had commented before, that when like it was something that I think like families in Philadelphia, and it was something that like one of the, I think it might have been the Philadelphia police chief or somebody had noted that because of like that Philly's had a reported uptick in crime recently, particularly gun crime, and we noticed that disputes between teenagers that would have once been like just the teenagers themselves, and you add like now, because of Philadelphia being stuck in a state with very weak gun laws, because it's often typically Republican control in Pennsylvania, you add guns, anything gets more like anything becomes worse. And like it speaks to the problem of so often in this country that people like to pretend that it's not because of the guns that are being introduced to something that will make any problem of just, let's say, like interpersonal problems that will always be there and can have different types, can have better or worse resolution, become lethal because of what gets introduced from guns. But to shift to one thing I wanted to touch on before is just kind of in the role of local media. One thing we were talking about is the trend that we've been seeing in recent years, where a lot of the, let's say, like local papers whether they did a good job or whether they didn't do a good job, often just don't even exist anymore. Or often in some places that do have a local paper, it's typically like some conservative rich guy has this and controls the editorial page, and they don't really publish anything other than things that serve that. And that, which does a real disservice to communities if you do, to not have some forms of local media. And when we're going to talk about what that, in terms of like the show that you have about helping to fill that gap that exists with a lot of traditional organs of local media going by the wayside.
Right. So I actually do. I mentioned earlier I had two shows. One is Manny on the Streets, where I go out on the streets and do the live streams. But then there's a show that I call Interviews. So it's where we take an inner look, an inner view of the person that we're essentially interviewing for that week. And the concept of that show was to break down labels, break down barriers, break down the boxes that everyone is put into, and just explore the individual and what they have to offer in whatever capacity that they're introducing themselves into. And a lot of our interviews have to circle around politics. And the reason why I feel like that is so important is because my goal is to educate, inform, and make aware of, while entertaining my audience, who happens to be my people. And the reason why is because that's the demographic that I have targeted, because I'm very nosy, but I'm also very well versed in politics, and I just want to know what's going on in my world, because I've always been a voter and I just want to be proactive. But I mean, my own family, my own sister, we share the same mother and father, refuses to vote. My mom, who had like voting. The reason why voting is so important to me is because a lot of what I watched her do growing up, doesn't vote, doesn't care to vote, doesn't want to vote, because the system has let us down so many times.
Yeah.
Again, particularly Black, Brown, and LGBTQ communities, because we ask for things, and it doesn't matter who we talk to, be it Democrat or Republican, doesn't matter. They all got all these, these, when they're in your face, they're going to help you fix the world. And you get all this hope. And sometimes I'd rather, again, you just be honest with me than to gas me up and have me elevated to cloud 99 only to fall on my face when the vote comes. You know, I've watched time and time again, regardless of whether you're a Democrat, Republican, what have you, there'd be some kind of situation. Just recently, in Worcester, there was a a topic on the housing and how out of control expensive it is to live here, and how the people want a cap on market rent because they're just using the Worcester Renaissance now to blast all these rents up to market Boston market rate, and that's driving out all of the people who live here, who have been here. But what people don't understand, the people who live here and who have been here are failing to understand, is first of all, a good 80% of them are Black, Latino, and LGBTQ, and they have the power, but they're not the ones voting. That entire 20% of white conservative property and business owners in Worcester are the ones that are voting to make sure that their interests stay in line. And we're just continuously, voluntarily staying left out because we got tired. We got tired of being gaslit into thinking that things are going to happen for us only to get people in office for it not to happen. So my goal is to get these individuals on my show so that the people I know can see me talking to them, can see me engaging with them, and can see me holding them accountable, because now what they're being said is being recorded. So we got that one leg up, right? You said something to us, it's recorded, you can't go back on it. Or at least that's the way my mind works. And that's the way I try to get these people to draw in and engage.
The way my mind works is you got to run for office. You got to get some of your friends to run for office. Do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that would be great. And a lot of people say that to me, but here's the systemic oppression there. We can't afford that shit.
Of course.
Stop making it so expensive. Yeah. Stop making money part of it. And I apologize for swearing, but that's what I hear a lot is why don't we get out and run for our own interests? First of all, a lot of my people do and have.
Yeah.
Again, you have to have the support. You have to have the money to be able to run for the campaign. You need the signs, you need the access, you need the volunteers, you need blah, blah, blah. You know what it is to run a campaign, I'm sure. I don't need to explain that to you. But then you need to get the people to get out there and vote for you. And a lot of times, the super voters, just to try to leave race out of this for a second, we all know who the super voters are.
Yes.
Are going to vote for their own interests. And people like me are not going to pander to their interests. We're going to pander to people like me's interests, right? We want to make sure that we have good schools where we're teaching things like economics and civics because they actually matter. We want to make sure that we have things like good roads so that when we are trying to drive our little hoopties to work, we don't have to worry about our axle breaking and now our next check going to cover our car repair bills. We want to make sure that we have market rent, right? Because we can't afford to live when we're making, and I'm talking about a teacher's salary, okay? They're making $46,000 a year, if they're lucky. I think it's more like $42,000 a year, and then be expected to pay $1,800 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. God forbid they have kids. So yes, it would be great to run. It would be amazing to run. But when you're working 2 jobs and you're still living paycheck to paycheck, how do I run for my own interests? I can't.
Yeah. And I don't know what the Worcester City Council pays either, but often the pay is so low that it's very difficult.
I've talked to many counselors and I'm friends with people on both sides of the aisle, and they don't do it for the pay. Let's just say that. They do it because they care. Well, they're supposed to care, or they do it because they care about the issues they're there for. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know on the Worcester City Council alone, there's one particular city councilor who is all about police, the sheriff's department, the police department, and making sure they're getting their funding. There's like, I think 2 other city councilors or 3 other city councilors that are more about property taxes and business taxes and like a conservative ideal. And then there's, on the other side of the aisle, you have the newest incumbent of city councilors who have been championing for our rights, because we've really been trying to, and when I say our, I'm again, Black, brown, and LGBTQ communities, because we're sick of it, and we've been trying to get someone in there. And finally, we have a Black man, Latino woman, a non-binary person, a Greek
Nice.
woman, a Greek Albanian, sorry. So there's these smaller community sectors that are now getting the attention they deserve. And before they got on just 2 years ago at the last election, it was pretty much all white councilors with the exception of 2. So those 2 city councilors, what were they ever able to do? The only thing that they could do is vote for the show of it, just to say, hey, look, I voted on this issue, but it never got anywhere because they need more than 2 votes, right?
Well, I'm glad things are going. It sounds like you've got some more
They
folks.
have
That's good.
turned because we have tried to take back the power and take our
Nice.
control. And I think a lot of that, it's not obviously not me alone. I would never be that narcissistic to say that, but a lot of it has to do with me and a community radio station where I started this whole venture in. Shout out to Unity Radio in Worcester. That's where I really got my exposure to know so many people and network with so many people. It's where I first started.
I think you cut out. There, we gotcha.
Hold on. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I was getting a call coming in. I'm like, I should have been on my computer with this. But it took a long time, and I had a lot of these people on, either at the radio station or on my own podcast, where I exposed them to a lot of my community, and vice versa. I exposed a lot of my community to them.
Great.
So that there was more of a mission and a reason behind why we needed to not only get people who are more representative of the melting pot of all the different cultures that is Worcester, but also get the community more engaged and involved. So we looked at things too, like for example, only 8% out of Great Brook Valley, out of 3,000 families, only 8% of those families voted. We had to make that obvious to them and say, look, this is why things aren't changing, because you're not allowing them to change for yourself. So it's very important that you know who you're voting for, that you know who align with your interests, so that you can then start impacting your own lives. Because I think a big part of it too is the media. Have you ever noticed that the media always talks about the presidential election?
Oh, yeah.
And very rarely about municipal elections. I think that's by design.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that the point you're making is such a key thing, because you have very clearly, when it comes to local elections, the turnout differences that do exist really at all elections are most pronounced. Where somebody who's voting in a local election is more likely to be older, whiter, more affluent, and more likely to be a property owner.
Yeah.
And that creates a dynamic where you have that kind of terrible vicious cycle of people who rightfully don't see responses to real issues and decide that they shouldn't vote. And because they choose not to vote, politicians don't see them as part of an electorate that they need to respond to in a local election.
Absolutely.
And one last point I really wanted to make, as far as like the exposure, is I also feel like it's important that I bring exposure to my community, because there's a lot of half truths or untruths or exaggerated truths about the white community. Our people, our communities don't necessarily trust a lot of white people, particularly those with the power, because of the stories, and the experiences too, to be fair, that they've heard, and mainly their exposure to a small number of white people doesn't necessarily reflect the overall mentality of every white person. We do have a lot of wonderful allies in the community. Shout out to Senator Robin Kennedy. She's amazing. And I'm going to be working with her. So stay tuned to Manny Jae Media. You should be seeing us about once a month, doing a check-in with her. She's Worcester 1st District Senator, State Senator. And she's going to be working a lot with us there. And it's important that we tell our community that there are a lot of great white people who do care about creating equality and giving the helping the American dream accessible for all.
Man, you are saying it like it is. Love it. I'm just thrilled to have met you and to hear stories about the great work that you're doing in Worcester and the surrounds, all the totally awesome people that you're having on your show. And
hopefully you, right? We're gonna get
we're
you
definitely
on there,
coming. We'd love to come in and talk, talk about state politics, what's going on at the State House and all that good stuff that we love to go on and on and on and on and on about.
Excellent.
So we're looking forward to it. Manny, what a pleasure. Loved having you on, and we look forward to chatting with you again soon on your show. Do you want to give folks one more time just how do they find you?
Absolutely. The pleasure is all mine, and I absolutely look forward to it. But please hit me up at Manny Jae Media. That's MannyJaeMedia on all platforms, primarily right now, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
Fabulous.
We got a lot of great videos to catch you up until you catch our next one. May 6th, by the way, is going to be our next interview. And we have the amazing Anna. She's going to be on there talking about behavioral health access. There's a new hotline you can call. I'm sorry?
Different Anna.
A different Anna, not this Anna. Yes, exactly. And we just got a whole bunch of great guests coming up. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, which is really important to me as well. I think a lot of America's problems stem from mental health, and that is the root of a lot of things. And if we paid more attention to it, put more money towards that rather than policing, we might find our adult humans doing a lot better in life. But with that said, you can find me again at Manny Jae Media on all platforms. Thank you.
Fabulous. So great to talk to you. See everybody next week. Hey there. Thanks so much for watching us on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. And it would be amazing if you would also subscribe to us on your favorite podcast player. Just look for Incorruptible Massachusetts wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much.